The Project. Kuwait. Learn. Live.
All right. So in today's episode, this is a follow-up conversation to my interview with Dr. Saad on diabetes in Kuwait. So we are joined with Dr. Neil Coffey, who is going to talk to us about the relationship between what is personal responsibility and what is government policy responsibility, and where those two concepts meet when it comes to preventing diabetes. And the boys are back today.
Kuwait silent killer right there with the yeah. Might kill Liam in this one.
I might find out I have diabetes because I eat a lot of sugar.
Which is scary. Which is really scary. The facts in this one are really scary. Like it's a deep episode. It's hardcore.
Yeah,
Definitely one of the more serious ones that we've done.
We get into it a little bit with science and everything like that, but actually, if you can stomach going through the science, listen to it a couple of times, and yeah, you'll find out some scary facts. But hopefully, some things that will change your life and change your habits.
And everybody, put down the kanafa for this one. Stop with the sugar and the chai. All right, like it's serious. Like you really gotta pay attention to what is said in this episode, especially the facts about how it's gonna really hit our economy sooner or later. I mean, that's the scariest part for me. 10 years, if you're paying so much out for the healthcare industry within Kuwait, it's scary facts. It's pretty scary.
Yeah. Definitely where your money is going to be spent, thinking about that. If you would rather spend your money on experiences, life experiences versus healthcare costs, that's something to definitely pay attention to. I think we're getting a little bit better at understanding, like reaching for candy bars and soda. I think everybody is at this point kind of aware of the dangers that those things pose. One of the other things that we touch on a little bit in this episode that we can get into more in other episodes is where sugar is hidden. Knowing that people are becoming a little bit more health conscious and, worried about diabetes and things like that. Being aware of, supplements that you take or things, disguised as healthy, different smoothies and shakes and protein bars and things like that. And just make sure you're checking your labels, because those artificial sweeteners that are usually hidden in there are some of the things that are linked more to diabetes than just like a plain Coke might be. So just got to pay attention and be aware of what you're reaching for. And at the end, no one's putting the candy and the sugar in your mouth except for you. So make a wise choice.
Yep. Sit back, relax, and drink some green tea.
Yes.
All this and more in today's episode.
We are welcoming into our podcast a very special guest today. And, everybody say hello.
Hello.
Hi.
That's the best way. We haven't taken a intro yet. But we're all here. Liam's here, Meg's here, and Dr. Neil is here joining us from Australia. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. I'm actually English.
Ooh, snap. My bad.
Yes, finally, someone got some support.
But I'm Australian at heart. Lived there for a long time. I'm a geographer, and I focus on health geography. So principally interested in how chronic disease is distributed across space. So we do what we call health and place research. So, the way I often talk about it is it's very simple to do analysis that can identify you've got a disease, chronic disease, type 2 diabetes, that's an issue at a country level, even here in the concept of, say, governance. Our aim is to actually look at the distribution at the very detailed level, so we can really identify the best locations to intervene for health. So we basically require lots of data. We work with a thing called Geographic Information Systems. It's a specific software that's been around in a computer form now, but basically it's a computer form of mapping. So mapping's been around forever. So I like to think that, we're just carrying on that grand tradition of understanding what's around us. And for us, it's what's around us in relation to health.
So in terms of Kuwait, I mean, how bad is it? How bad is the Middle East right now? I mean, since the introduction of Western foods in probably the 1970s and 1980s, I'm sure there's been a spike in type 2 diabetes, especially in Kuwait. I see it more or less with the expatriates that come here, within 5-6 years or 10 years after they stay here. A lot of them develop diabetes, and I'm 100% positive it has to do with the food and the change in diet. So, I mean, how bad is it in the Middle East, just to get your perspective on it and realistically?
It's pretty bad. I think that's fair to say. So typically prevalence in Kuwait is around 21%. So to put that in context of, say, the US, the UK, Australia, it's about double. So it is quite significant. I was talking to a researcher at Dasman who was saying that, in one of their studies they had up to half the population that they sampled, just a random sample. The half were either diabetic or pre-diabetic. And basically of the number, pretty much the entire population was either overweight or obese.
What makes pre-diabetic? Like, what would be the markers for that?
You take a HbA1c, it's a blood measure. It's a kind of a 3-month average of your blood sugars. So it's a good marker of what's going on. So, and for many people, they will be diabetic and they just don't know it. And so, pre-diabetics, their blood sugars are elevated. And without changing their lifestyle, they'll go full type 2 diabetic. And depending on, how close they are to becoming type 2 diabetic, depends on really that sedentary lifestyle, poor eating habits. So, you mentioned eating, but it's not just eating. Because, if you eat and you do lots of exercise, you burn up if you eat and you don't do any exercise, then basically it just lays down over time, lays down as fat and just causes those problems. I mean, it's just a combination of all those things, overweight, obese, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, they just all come together. And, that's the real issue. It's a chronic disease problem. It's not just type 2 diabetes, it's all of those things that cluster. And basically, if you don't do something about it, and I was saying this to someone earlier today, it won't be that long before the children being born will have a shorter life expectation than their parents when they were born. So all of those advances we've made, if you like, in sort of medical technology and life improvement so that, the Western world sees life expectation for males and females up in the 80s, we're moving into the territory where we'll start to reverse that. We haven't, the project's just started in Kuwait, so we don't have a great deal of insight. I certainly can't provide a lot of insight at this point because we're only just starting. But, in Australia where the problem is not as bad, we're starting to see type 2 diabetes in kids. So instead of it used to be known as mature age or mature onset diabetes.
Adult onset. That's right. Yeah.
And so now you can see kids who are pre-diabetic at age 12. And so they'll be type 2 diabetics in their teens. And that's just, I don't know. To me, that's just horrific.
That's the thing that is shocking is the life expectancy, it was longer because of, advances in medicine. And so it's like we have all these things and really Western medicine, like I think the best thing that's come out of that is just trauma care. But other than that, I think we're just we're getting sicker. All the advances that we've had. And as you said, the life expectancy is gonna drop, or maybe we're living to that life expectancy, but then how many of those people are hooked up to tubes until they're, until the end? How many are actually living a quality life?
That's right. We medicate. So the response to a lot of these issues is medication. We see that the funding that goes into medical research in particular goes into, curing disease or building hospitals and providing that medical care. We work in what you might call health promotion, really. The aim for us is to prevent rather than try and come up at some later date and treat. So, we're all about identifying, understanding, tailoring interventions to basically create a situation where these kids won't be diabetic in 25 years' time. It's a hard sell, though, isn't it? You go to a politician and say, I've got this great idea, and in 25 years we'll see enormous benefits in the health system. And politicians in there for 3 years.
There's
so
no
it's
immediacy.
like, what can you do for me now? I'll tell you what, I can build a new hospital, and then I get to open it, and I'm famous. Got the name on the hospital, and that's great. So that's part of the issue we're up against, and that's repeated all over. That's someone was saying that to me today at a meeting. It's what happens to us in Australia, the UK, US, Canada, all those countries. The long term isn't really viewed. It's all about short term. More hospital beds, more research into medication. Big drug companies, they make a lot of money out of all of those medications that go. to basically treat all of those, high blood pressures, your type 2 diabetics, and so on. So
that's what Saad had mentioned last time as well, that's what's going to end up draining the economy is the management aspect of it. So do you have any information on the numbers of like how much is being spent, in the healthcare on managing diabetes in Kuwait, or is there any kind of the financials of how much it's costing the country right now? Do you have any of that within the research or no?
Can't do it on Kuwait.
Yeah.
I can give you some ideas elsewhere.
Yeah.
So there was a meta-analysis done recently. So that's like a big review of research on a particular thing. This one was actually looking at the cost savings to the health system for being physically active and eating better. And they were basically saying for every dollar you spend in health promotion, you get $8 to $10 back in savings. There was a study done on walkability, which was basically saying that walkable suburbs basically reduce cardiovascular disease, and cardiovascular disease being in that whole cluster of things we were just talking about, by about 30%, the risk of cardiovascular disease by 30%. So, you put money into doing those things, you get big savings. In Australia, the health budget consumes probably about 25% of the overall budget, but with the forecast of the number of people who are going to be sicker over time, and as you say, they will live, but they will be sick. So they're going to have to be treated, they're going to be medicated, hospitalised, at-home care, all of those things. There's a real fear that the health budget can't sustain all of that when all of that sort of comes together. It's a baby boom generation, essentially, the baby boom generation of just this massive number of people flowing through and have created, the need for lots of things every time they've arrived at a different stage of their life, schools, universities, jobs, housing, etc. And the same thing, they're the ones now who are at that point where they'll have health issues, but they'll live longer.
Right.
And quality, who knows, but certainly cost. So I can't imagine that you would spend in Kuwait any less than we would on health. And if we're putting about 25% in and we got half the prevalence of type 2 diabetes that you've got,
it's too much.
I'm guessing you spend a fair bit more.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, and it'll just get worse. It won't get better.
With Kuwait being the country that it is and the enormous wealth that we have here, I mean, put politics aside, because I hate discussing politics. It's like, it's just like a broken record going around. But what can we do? What can people like me do? What can, average people contribute to fixing this problem? Because it's not just going to be government. It's going to start within the homes. So what can mom and dad do at home?
I think that the best thing is being active, eating well and being active. And I think from the point of view of what can you do at home, you can start to modify the amount of food that comes out at any gathering, for example. You can bring out water instead of soft drink. You can ensure that soft drink becomes like an occasional drink, whereas the rest of the time you're drinking things that are not full of sugar.
I guess it's quite interesting for me. I come from the UK and there's like a load of different kind of like low calorie alternatives to like your full calorie soft drinks. And I was expecting coming out here like it to be kind of like America in that like there's pretty much like a low calorie iced tea, 0 calorie this, 0 calorie that. But then the large majority, and in most cases in the small shops, there's 0 like low calorie alternatives. So I guess that's kind of like an option for families to kind of making those kind of choices where if a kid doesn't want or he's not going to have water, they're kind of moving them over to a low calorie Sprite or a low calorie Coke, and then hopefully trying to reduce the amount of those that they're drinking in a day is going to help, right?
Yeah, I guess the point is to try and stop it in the first place.
Yeah, for sure.
So when they're very young, get them used to drinking water and eating fruit.
Yeah.
Rather than drinking soft drinks and eating chocolate and chips and all those other things, because it's kind of killing them with kindness, really, isn't it? I mean, you want your children to have all the things you didn't have. It's always kind of the way. As a parent, you want your kids to have all the advantages they can possibly have, but putting all that stuff into them is really harming their health long term. You see just as I said, that the fact that you can see type 2 diabetics in 11-year-old children that's just scary. It's frightening in the extreme. Drinking water, being physically active. I mean, those are eating well. If you don't go to McDonald's every day. Go to McDonald's occasionally, not at all. But
Yeah, ideally not at all. Ideally,
and try and limit those sorts of things. So instead of having them as the everyday, have them say once a month. And make it a part of something that's an earning. Like a good walk, or go down to the park and kick a football around for an hour, and because I've seen the parks have got McDonald's in them.
yes.
The
gyms
have McDonald's.
Have McDonald's attached to them now.
I think the individuals can do a lot. They can think about their own behaviour, but they can also start movements that influence people who make policy. And I think that's the other important thing. If a whole group of people in a suburb said, we want to walk, but there's nowhere to walk in our suburb, then the municipality would have to take notice. Yeah. We want footpaths, we want trees to shade the footpaths, right? And we don't want McDonald's in our park. That's the kind of thing. We did some research in Australia on fast food near schools, which was a replication of some work done earlier by another colleague in Canada. And not only do we see schools and fast food being associated, but we also see schools in lower SES areas having significantly more fast food associations than schools in high socioeconomic areas. So there's a socioeconomic gradient as well. But getting back to that specifics, I think if people decide they want something, in the end it'll happen. If people decide they want to walk, or they want to ride, or they don't want something in their area, it's that community bottom up approach to change that can make a difference. We always, I think one of the problems we often have is that we always look to the government to solve everything for us. We've got a problem, the government has to solve it for us. And when they don't, we don't do anything about it. It's like, well, the government didn't solve it, what can I do? Well, what you can do individually is basically come together and say, no, we want you to do something to help us. We want to walk. We want our kids not to be bombarded with fast food. In the school canteens, we want you to take that rubbish out and put good food and drink in. It's the individuals who will come together as collectively to enact those changes. And I think, we need to think like that rather than say, we have a problem. The medical profession will solve it for us by giving us drugs, or the government will solve it for us. How, I'm not sure, because really the government can make better built environments. They can improve the suburbs. They can have footpaths and trees for shade. They can separate those walking trails from the freeways. They can provide opportunities for getting safely across roads so that people can walk. There's a lovely park. What's the park called?
El Shahid?
El Shahid Park.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be fabulous if it went all the way around from coast to coast? So instead of just being a piece of crescent in the middle, it went all the way to the bay on that side and all the way on that side.
Well, it'd be fabulous if it was closer to residential areas.
Yeah, that's right.
Rather than just right next to the city.
But if it connected to the coast,
you'd have a lot
and then
of
you've got all of that walking and riding capability on the coast, you can park down, ride your bike up into the park, do something, ride back down, walk. So there are things like that can be done as well. Thinking about the built environment and infrastructure that basically helps people to physically. That's one of the areas we do a lot of work in, and that is the built environment. We characterise the environment as being walk supportive or not, and then we look at the associations between those locations where walking or being physically active has a higher score, and then we associate that with health outcomes. And the research pretty much everywhere around has found that areas that have better infrastructure enabling people have less risk of those chronic diseases. And it's that whole thing. And it's also, changing social norms. People will do what people around them do. So if you live in an area that is full of obese people and you're overweight, you'll think you're looking pretty good. And you won't really look at it and go, I need to do something about it. But if you live in an area where people are pretty thin and you're overweight, you're going to start thinking, I don't look the same as everyone else. Pretty much need to do something about this. And that's how it happens. So, that's another area that we've done work in, looking at how social norms do in fact change those outcomes. And so, they're all things that can be worked on as well, aren't they? I mean, you think social norms are really just people's perceptions of what's going on. If you can modify people's perceptions of things, you can change those behaviours, and they'll come from individuals coming together. So that the mall walking movement, that starts to get bigger. People want the mall walkers, and mall's a funny term for me because we call them shopping centres, but mall walkers, I'm sure they would love to walk outside if they could as well. Yeah. If there were opportunities. And so,
I think people wait until winter here, and as soon as winter hits, they can't wait to get outside. So I think the desire is there, but they just need something that's kind of a little bit more accessible for around the year. Yeah. And I have people who, like clients who will go away, they'll go on holiday to Italy or wherever, and they come back and they're slimmer. Yeah. And they're like, how did this even happen? I went away, I ate whatever I wanted, I drank whatever I wanted, and like I feel better.
Are way higher.
Yeah, and I was like, well, you were probably walking between the shops, and you go on this, and you go and walk into the pizza place, and you're kind of like being out and about, and you're in fresh air.
And if you did go somewhere, you probably caught a bus or a train.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you walked to it. So, the classic concept of a bus is a walk interrupted.
Yeah.
You walk to the bus stop, you get on the bus, you get off, and you walk to the other side. So there are a lot of challenges in Kuwait. I think, this is my second visit now. So the project started about 6 months ago. We came out a few months before the project officially started. And, obviously the climate's a problem. I don't think anyone would say, hey, you've got to get out there and jog at 5 degrees. I think most of us would. You might jog and then die. It's certainly not.
You have to
conducive.
go at like 4 or 5 in the morning. Al Shahid Park is where I used to do that, but it's a short time frame.
But you also don't really have public transport,
right?
Yeah, so everyone has to drive. The entire Kuwait is built around people driving everywhere. It's all big freeways, and then suburbs in between, and road systems that are all 2 lanes, 4 lanes, 6 lanes, 8 lanes, and that makes it very hard. It's not a pedestrian friendly environment. You don't walk out of your door and think, I think I might walk into the city today. It's just not going to happen. And because there's not a great infrastructure for public transport, it doesn't happen either. Imagine if there was we often look at the European cities, and they're so good because they happened a long time ago before the car.
Yeah.
And so they're connected, and they put public transport in because there was no other way for people to get around, and they kept it. And so it's used now as much as it was before. And in some of the cities, they stop a lot of the traffic inside the old city areas so that you have to walk around, and to get to it, you get on the bus or a tram or a train. And, those sorts of things, if Kuwait was thinking infrastructure spend, then public transport would be a great option. Trams that enable people to basically get on the tram, rip into the city.
Yeah, the solution has been more roads. And I think I heard someone, how did they describe it? They said, building more roads to fix the traffic problem in Kuwait is like giving a fat guy a bigger belt to fix his weight problem. Yeah. That's exactly what it is.
Exactly right. And they'll fill up as fast as you build them.
Right.
As fast as you add a lane, it fills up. It's a bit just like fluid dynamics. You've got a pipe of any diameter and you force water into it, and you too much water, it jumps out the back. You make the pipe bigger. And then as soon as the pressure builds up again, it just jumps out the back.
Right.
It's the same thing with roads. You keep adding lanes whilst people are still adding more and more cars, and the net result's always going to be the same. It's congestion. You get a short-term fix, and then it's need to build more lanes.
Who would you say the role model is in the Middle East in terms of what they're doing right? I mean, we all know it's probably Dubai, but in general, we know how bad Kuwait is. I'm a Kuwaiti. I understand it. I agree with it. But who's the role model? Who's someone that we can kind of imitate, so to speak? I mean, is it Oman? Is it Qatar? Is it? I mean, Dubai's well more advanced than us. Is it Abu Dhabi? Possibly. I mean, Dubai just recently did the Fit 30, so it's like it's almost it's tough for us because legislation and politics and the red tape kills us. But who could we imitate, maybe even from a private sector perspective, versus instead of the government perspective, because private sector really doesn't do much here in terms of supporting the community and social awareness. I mean, you see it in the States, McDonald's, yeah, as bad as they are, but they'll put up some parks. There's a place for kids to go and play. Yeah, it's tough, but here we don't have it in Kuwait. So who can we look at, and who can we hold accountable besides the government and ourselves?
Very tough questions. I don't know enough about the Gulf yet. What I've seen so far, UAE definitely does well. They've definitely got programs in. They've thought about programs for kids and healthy eating in schools and so on. I think the point is that there's a lot that's happening all over the world, and it might not just be something that's happening in the Gulf that's worth looking at into what's happening elsewhere that might be adapted. I mean, healthy eating in school canteens is widespread across many, many countries. The concept of better built environments is common across. So I think that is what's happening in some areas, as well as they start to think about building new urban areas. Instead of just building them in the old model, they're starting to think about parks and walk and interconnectivity. But I still think, one of the big problems you have here in Kuwait is that you've got this urban infrastructure that's all car. It's all road, suburbs, big roads, suburbs, big roads. And, to get something happening in that space, I think is going to be critical at some point. I mean, I know there are a couple of smart or healthy cities on the being worked on here now, and they'll be good, and they'll be good internally. And so people will have a better opportunity in their suburb to be more active. And I think that's as good a start as you can get, really. If you can improve the within suburb in the first instance, and then the between suburb at a later point. But, you really need to make that change within those suburbs. I think suburbs at the moment still have just a car focus, because, as we said, there are no footpaths. There are no shade trees. So if you did want to walk from your house to the co-op, you just have to walk on the road. And in my short time here, walking on the road would scare me. I had to cross a road here the other day when we were out looking at something, and there was a pedestrian crossing, but they don't work the way I'm used to.
No, it's kind of just there.
Yeah. Well, if there's no camera at the traffic light, then red just means go extremely fast. And so green actually means slow down to avoid anybody who's following the red.
There's one thing I've noticed that really puzzles me. The people are very polite. When you're walking around, everyone's really polite.
When you're walking.
That's right. That's exactly the point. People are courteous, polite, but as soon as they get in the car,
rude.
It just changes. It's like, I don't know why. It happens everywhere. It's not just here. But it's one of those things that I think is another one of those things that we need to think about. That is, why can we be polite and pleasant to each other when we're walking around and looking each other in the eye, but as soon as we get into the car,
the mindset,
see every person for themselves.
Yeah, the mindset is totally different. I think when you're out for a walk, there's some intention there of, what you're doing out there. When you're in the car, it's this mindset of my time's more important than yours. And everybody it's just that belief and action is what you see on the roads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the thing is that we'll be coming back from time to time, and it would be great for us to have, opportunities in the future where we can really start talking about things that we've researched and talk about real results. I mean, at the moment we know there's a problem. Type 2 diabetes. Diabetes here is very serious. There's a lot of it. And looking at the information we've got in front of us at the moment, we can see that the urban infrastructure is not great. Yeah. The thing for us now is to start doing the research that identifies how much that impacts on the prevalence of type 2 diabetes, and then start to think about those things that might be done based on evidence. Having said that, I still, as I said, I'm a firm believer in people basically deciding for themselves that they want something better and making it happen. Nothing works better than people power in the end. People want it, it'll happen, because the politicians in the end take note. As soon as you've got enough people that's going to influence voting, it starts to influence outcomes.
Well, on the flip side, that's exactly what's happened now. As we talk about it being kind of a social disease of the people that are around you, you're going to see that. And it's gotten enough attention to where now something is being done. So exactly that. If enough people come together on the right side of it, which would be being active and being healthy, then it can spark a different kind of a recognition, new statistics for Kuwait, and a lot of Kuwaitis are very proud to be Kuwaiti, but giving that maybe a little bit of a different meaning of, maybe setting a standard. Maybe they can be the one the rest of the Gulf looks to.
Yeah.
I'm proud to be a Kuwaiti, but this conversation sucks, to be honest with you. I mean, it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had, but from a Kuwaiti perspective, I'm terrified right now. Like, I'm not going to lie. I'm definitely terrified of the impact of what you're saying this all could have on Kuwait in about 15 to 20 years when my son's generation, comes to and gets into the working force. And all of a sudden now it's, hey, we have no money left because we've been spending it all on, diabetes, heart health, because we couldn't smarten up and just eat the right foods and just move around a little bit more. I mean, for you, it must suck to see this as statistics. I've seen it in family. I see it in family. I see the obesity. And, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, a lot of people around me were not fit, but they were in better health. Now it's blown up and I'm terrified. How do you feel when you see these stats blowing up globally and in your home country? Like, how does it make you feel?
The same. Yeah, it is terrifying because you think that the legacy we're leaving is not one of eating well and being physically active. We have 75-inch televisions and PlayStations and iPads, all those things that cause the distractions. And the legacy we leave is not one that promotes even a concept in most families that health is important. And because we've got, as I said before, such high rates of obesity and overweight, what people see next door looks normal. So they don't think in the sense that, there's something wrong, we're not healthy, because what they see around them is that's what they see. It's their norm. It's no one's being incredibly active and no one's eating well. And there has to be a role for government in the end, though. I mean, the sugar tax in the UK recently is the classic case. We tried to get it in Australia as well, but the big companies always push back and talk about, no, we'll do it. we'll monitor ourselves, which is not
Never
dissimilar.
works.
No, it's not. But there has to be some top-down intervention on what foods cost in some respects. I mean, sometimes it's the cost that can be the driver for changing behaviours. If sugary drinks are significantly more than water, then it becomes an option that people will consider. Because you look at the price of bottled water. I'm not sure here what it sits like, but in Australia it costs more for a litre of water than it does for a litre of petrol when you buy it in the shop. It's just so expensive. But a bottle of Coke comes in at like $1.25.
It's cheaper. Yeah,
much cheaper, and that's like a 1.75 or 2 litres of Coke is under $2, and it's $3.50 for 500 millilitres of water.
It's not right.
No. So, so there are those issues around guidelines, and we've been talking with the Public Authority for Food and Nutrition about food classifications and nutrition guidelines, because you need those in place as well.
That'll be like in schools and in hospitals and
just for the population.
Okay.
You talk about your food pyramid.
Yeah.
And countries have food guidelines about so we talk about eating bound to get this wrong, 4 or 5 fruits a day and 7 veggies, I think it is. It's probably too much. But
they usually say like 8 to 10, like a combo of
like
each,
a handful of that is the one veg. So you have kind of 5 or 6 of those with your meal. And so the guidelines propose what is a healthy diet that you can aim for to basically reduce that calorie intake. And those are the sort of things that are important. You do need something like that you can point to. Schools is the great place.
I think
kids take stuff
for
on,
me,
don't
that's where it starts, like schools. High schools and everything like that. Because I mean, I know even in the UK, I remember being taught things about nutrition when I was starting to do sport and everything. I would take that information home. I'd tell my mum. She'd ask me what I learned at school today, and I'd be like, I learned about this. And she'd be like, oh, really? Yeah, I didn't know that. Okay, like we're going to start changing this bits and this bits, because obviously for parents, it's kind of, they're just doing what they already know. And so then they're not actually going to school and learning anything new, but the kids are learning stuff, and they're open to learning things as well. I find that with my clients as well, that if I'm teaching them stuff and then a couple months later they'll come back and they say, oh, my mum started going to the gym, or my dad started going to the gym, or my older brother, like they like see what you're doing, or we see the videos that I take of them, and they want to do more. And so it's kind of like the younger guys who need that influence, because they're more open to it. They see they're the ones who are seeing the Western cultures and seeing the shape that they are, and then realizing that it's not normal to be this overweight, and it's not normal to be that uncomfortable when you're sleeping, and it's not normal to kind of struggle to walk upstairs. That's right. And it's not normal to drive a car everywhere. Yeah. Like no other city in the world drives a car as much. So it's like kind of like they're the ones who are seeing that a lot more. And so I know from my perspective, when I get to work with someone who's younger, like kind of helping them to just understand like what's actually going on in the grand scheme of things, I know is helping like the wider family when they get home. And even that is sometimes a barrier as well, because that wider family is sometimes like trying to feed them all the time. Like you said about the amount of food that they have at gatherings and things like that. Yeah. And then if those guys are choosing like, hey, I'm just going to have a chicken leg and some of this vegetable stuff and a little bit of rice, then when the kanafa comes out, then they're like, no, I'm okay, thank you. And then the rest of the family's like, what are you doing? Why? Like, have some kanafa. Yeah, just a little bit. And then they have a little bit, and like, oh, just a little bit more. And they're like, well, they actually don't want any, but they're like their family who they trust and they love and everything is trying to help them in their way, but actually it's killing them ultimately.
That's one of the biggest habits that I have a hard time with my clients, is differentiating between I need to eat and I should eat and I want to eat. And it's that should eat, and it's at that family gathering. It's like everybody else is eating, I feel like I should.
But you have to have the kanafa with like 15 tablespoons of the sugar on
syrup.
it. And, you know, you got to get the cream on there, and then you got to have the piece of cake afterwards. And then you got to have your tea with what my dad likes is 4 sugars, which is way too much for a 60-year-old man. Yeah, Dad, I'm sorry.
Anybody?
Yeah. No. I mean, like I've seen my father. He'll like just douse his tea with sugar, and a lot of Kuwaiti families do that. You would not believe. Like fasting is really good. Ramadan is supposed to be a great month. You're supposed to cleanse the body a little bit. It's supposed to be a healthy month, and you would not believe the amount of junk that people will eat after futur. You'll have futur. It will be mainly like a tashriba dish, or, you know, whatever your family serves. It's based on your family's tradition. But as soon as you finish, you go out, you're already full. And then you're just, you know, they're serving up the cake, and it's the kanafa, and then it's the what's it called? Oh, the little dumpling things with the sugar sauce all over it. It's insane. It's just unbelievable. And I mean, on that note, what can you teach us, or what takeaways can you give all of the listeners out there of what to do? Because we probably have some teachers that are listening to this, and I believe that we are all, you know, everyone educates the younger generation. So how can we do things a little bit better? You know, just the small things. What are some of the little things that you've seen globally and that we can implement here?
Well, I think that, as I said before, getting schools to move to healthy canteens is an important thing. So the food and drink that's available at the school is modified so that it's healthy. Education about healthy eating and the importance of it, and education about the importance of being physically active. Because, you know, as you say, children take messages on very, very seriously, especially in the younger ages, and they will take those messages home. They will say that, you know, we learnt today that we're not physically active, you know, we'll die younger, you know. And if we don't eat properly, you know, we're going to basically get diseases that'll make our life shorter, you know. Obviously, you don't use those scare tactics. You have to be very clever about it. You've got to sell the message in a good way. The one thing that when you were talking about, I was thinking, does school have physical activity programs? Is that part of schooling?
Government school? No. You know, like, well, back in my day, it was you take a soccer ball, throw it out and say, here you go. This is PE class. And I'm pretty sure it's still along those same lines. But there are other schools And I will give them a shout out because they're awesome at this. Like ASK, they have probably one of the best athletics programs for a high school in Kuwait. And they've always been kind of the leader and, with the school system. But I mean, physical education, it's not, learning to climb a rope or some of the things that we probably did as kids. I know in the States, Meg.
We never did rope climbing.
You guys never did rope climbing? Really?
No, our gym class honestly was pretty pathetic, but it was an hour that was required, of the day. And I was an athlete though, but that was the other thing too. Like gym class might've been a little off, but like everybody played a sport, like as a kid, like you did softball, you did volleyball, you did swimming, you did something, like we all learned how to swim. Like it's just, you did something. Yeah. You rode your bike around, exactly all of that. So, our gym class, it was like learning how to play different sports, but it wasn't like any real physical skill test of any kind.
I was pretty young, but I always remember there was always a rope there, and there's sports.
Fond memories of climbing a rope.
I know, right?
Fond memories of climbing a rope.
But there are no sports here for kids. Even, you'll have baseball. I've coached baseball for 12 years or 10 years or however long it's been, since like 2005. And they play twice a week. That is not enough exercise for a child. Twice a week is not enough for a kid. And over the years, I've seen it get progressively worse. That not just the athleticism, but just kids are just way out of shape. And they've got upper cross going on, and they can't even do a squat. So, it's.
I think sometimes the kids here are given too much choice. I remember when I was in school, my mum would take me to club. She'd be like, "You're going to swimming club." I hated swimming club, but she'd take me like twice a week. She'd be like, you're going.
But that's the point. You're right. Yeah.
So I think sometimes, again, we came back to the parents trying to give their kids everything they didn't have. And maybe they didn't have any choice before. And so they're kind of trying to give them as much choice as possible. But now actually, when it comes to sport and it comes to health, like they should be going, you're going to go. Like, you're going to thank me for it eventually. Like, just go. You're going to enjoy it. If you don't enjoy that, we'll take you to something you will enjoy, but you're going to do some sort of physical activity.
Something.
And my mum will love that. It's like she listens to it, but to this podcast, and she'll love me remembering that. But I remember her going, whatever you want to find, like we will find something for you, but you're going to do physical activity. And obviously now, I thank her massively for it. But it was even when I was in school, I was doing club rugby, so that was two practices a week. Then it was, and then it was then school rugby was 2 practices a week and 1 game, and then so I had ultimately two games of rugby, 80 minutes, and then you had 4 practices as well, and then you had your teacher going, okay, you're 15, 16, you should start getting into the gym a couple of times a week. And ultimately, then you're working out 8, 9 times a week. And you look at what we think of the top CrossFitters now, they're training 8, 9 times a week. And so it's not kind of something that's abnormal. It's just moving around and throwing a ball around, kicking a football, cycling to the football, cycling to school, whatever it is. And just trying to move more is a massive thing. And I think it needs to come from parents to encourage it and allow it. But then it needs to come from the kids to be able to kind of take that back and understand it as well.
Yeah, that's where that concept of guideline comes in. The 30 minutes a day walking is kind of 1 hour's great, but 30 minutes, it doesn't have to be a one go either. Mm-hmm. You can do 1 hour a day that's made up of 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. Cumulatively, you get that 1 hour in. Yeah, and maybe we start using things like the Garmin and the Fitbit as an incentive for kids to aim for 10,000 steps a day, because 10,000 steps is kind of the guideline as well. You get 10,000 steps in a day, you've basically reached that requirement of physical activity level for the day.
I give my clients 8 to 15 as their goal, and it is like a game, and just how well they could get with it. And even for myself, it's looking at that. And I don't use a Fitbit or anything yet, but on my phone I'll track some stuff, and it gets a little bit of a fun game to how far did you get and how many miles I get and how long did it take me?
There's a system set up in Western Australia that encourages kids to enrol their school in these programs for cycling and walking. And then as they enrol other students in the school into it, their activity gets logged, and it's kind of like a league table of fitness and activity in the school, and it creates competition. And competition drives people. More kids come in, they want to, so when they walk, those steps go in, or if they ride their bike to school, that distance goes into the system and it just builds up. They've got companies involved as well, so you get companies. So, there's you have to be careful that you don't focus on sport in the sense, because a lot of kids don't like sport, and you'll actually stop them. Because if it's about sport, some kids will never be good at sport no matter what you do. But we want them to be physically active, so that's why, talking about things like walking, pretty much everyone can walk. And that walking, in its own right, if someone walks for that half hour, 1 hour a day, they will start to feel the benefits to their health relatively quickly. As you say, they'll be able to walk up the stairs without being breathless. They'll suddenly realise that the notch on the belt goes in. Yeah. It's because it's just that, it's that benefit that accrues with doing it every day. Of course, it then gets easier to do every day. So with kids, getting them to do half an hour a day of some kind of physical activity, walking around the school, walking.
Yeah. So with the, going back to some of the research that you guys have done in Australia, and you talked about the Aboriginal communities, and knowing that, in Kuwait, we're dealing with a deep cultural, social norm, and the Aboriginal community is quite common with that. What's the, approach, I guess, that you guys have had through the research of that, of figuring out what are the good and bad sides of that, of where you're finding it within those communities, or how are you trying to educate there? Does it start with the kids there as well? Does it start with the families? Or the parents? Or what's kind of been the research on there?
It's a lot harder. I mean, you're talking about the First Nations people, essentially. So, you talk about massive shifts in what the culture was versus kind of what's been forced on them, and so it's, the real problem for the Indigenous communities that, we might talk about having a life expectation of 80 odd years, but for Indigenous, it's about 25 years less.
Yeah.
And it's the hardest thing to research by far, because it's difficult, because most people, a lot of the research is always about being negative. They want to just identify all those bad things, and then they want to publicise the bad things, because they want to embarrass the government as well. So working in Indigenous communities is particularly difficult. We're trying to do the opposite of that and identify the good communities to improve the bad communities.
That's great.
And so, because it's the good stories that will usually work in the long run. You keep telling people negative things, and they just believe all those negative things. If everyone's told all the time they're stupid, they start to believe it. If you tell people that, they're not stupid, then they'll achieve a lot more. It's the same in health. If you can identify those things about the communities that are working, it might be governance, it might be the way the shop stocks its shelves, it might be the products they sell. And then you can start to introduce those models into other communities, and slowly you can improve.
I think
nothing happens quickly, though.
Yeah.
The whole point with research is really building sufficient evidence to get that evidence base to enact some change. We talked about walkability in the built environment. Research in that area has been going on for probably 15 or 16 years.
Oh, wow.
It's only in the last few years we're starting to see significant gains in urban planning, and urban planners talking about, constructing environments that are walkable and more healthy. Providing sufficient open spaces for people to go to, connectivity for them. So there's, you have a park, but you don't have to drive to it. You can walk to it. It's about identifying the things that are good in the areas that are doing better, and trying to see how you can improve some of the areas that aren't doing so well.
I like that approach a lot. It's the same thing when you talk about the mindset of, if you're constantly telling yourself that you're stupid or whatever, and it's always going to be that way. I think it's the same thing applies with aging. And we've kind of got this belief too that aging is just supposed to be hard and difficult, and I've worked in my life, and so I should be able to eat these things and not, do anything. I've worked already, kind of that retirement thing. I see that with some people. And so it's I think kind of building that mindset from the kids up of you can carry this on into late life and not end your life. connected to tubes and on medications and feeling good. Like aging doesn't have to mean.
It's been a deep
like
conversation tonight.
Yeah.
It's been a very deep conversation, and thank you so much. And whatever you need from us later on, when you come back here, I'd love to have you on again. I think we'd all be interested to see what your findings are with Kuwait. And if there's anything at all you need, like, just please don't even hesitate. I am definitely willing to do anything to help my community, hands down. Yeah, that's what it's about. That's what this is all about right here. We want to bring great minds to the table so we can hear from them and understand and get a better understanding of it. So thank you very much.
Get your block to be the fittest block in your area.
Get my block to be That's actually a great idea. You know what?
Good idea.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
I raised that with the people in Kuwait already about, those Diwani meetings.
Yeah.
Let's turn them into sporting events.
Yeah.
Let's have, competitions between them. So instead of just sitting around talking and eating, let's make them indoor soccer or something.
They're going to turn the PlayStation on. All right. They'll turn the PlayStation on. That's what's going to happen.
PlayStation
What
competition.
if they just eliminated, so as you said, even if they just made their beverages, different or some of their snacks different, you could even have a competition that way without even.
But it goes back to what you guys were saying earlier with, it's a young mindset. When you instill these behaviors from a young age, it sticks with you for the rest of your life. I mean, look, my parents, I was drinking Pepsi at the age of like 5, probably, whereas my kid, DJ, if you say, do you want a Pepsi? He'll say, no, there's too much sugar in it. And he'll say, Daddy, why is she drinking Pepsi or Coca-Cola? And I'm like, well, buddy, everyone, adults make their own choices. And it's tough. As a parent, it is difficult to get the physical activity in for your child. I mean, Liam saw me earlier today. I had my kid on the scooter. He had gymnastics before that. He, had a picnic at school. So he was outside running around playing hide and go seek. He's got swimming twice a week. I try and keep the kid going, because I know when I came to Kuwait, when I moved over here after the invasion, I like just blew up like a balloon. And thank God, like I smartened up at the age of 34, 33. But, it's been a deep talk, man. It's been really deep. So thank you
so much for
Thank
coming.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. You can also find us on Instagram at The Project Kuwait. Thank you, and join us next time.